The train rhythmically clacked its wheels, carrying Streltsov and Sokolova northward. Endless snow-covered forests of the Vologda region drifted past the window. It was still about 6 hours to Arkhangelsk. Igor stared out the window, but he wasn't seeing the winter landscape, only fragments of memories. He tried to remember his mother's face, but instead of a clear image, only a blurred shadow appeared in his mind. Merak had taken not just memories, he had taken the emotional connection to them, the warmth they once brought. The first time is always the hardest. Vera sat across from him, flipping through the case pages. You get used to it later. What did you give up the first time? Asked Streltsov, turning away from the window. Vera froze for a moment, then closed the folder and carefully placed it on the table between them. Memories of my first love, she answered quietly. You know, from school, all those notes, dates in the park, first kiss, Zarya took them completely. And you don't regret it? Do I regret not remembering the name of the boy I kissed in 8th grade? She smiled without humor. Not particularly, but sometimes I catch myself thinking that there's an emptiness inside me that can never be filled. She took her medallion from her pocket. Inside, light gently pulsed. Zarya seemed to be dozing. But this is the price we pay, and it's worth it. Remember the eyes of those children when we led them out of the church? For that, you can give up a part of your soul. Streltsov nodded. She was right. The images of the rescued children stood clearer in his mind than his own mother's face. Tell me more about the new assignment, he asked, wanting to change the subject. The village of Kolmogorye. Vera opened the folder again. 2 kilometers away from it, in 1919, white guards executed about 100 Red Army soldiers and peasants who supported Soviet power. A typical Civil War story, nothing special. But in recent months, locals have begun seeing strange things. Ghostly figures in Budanovka hats, sounds of gunfire in the night, moans and screams from the forest. At first, they dismissed it as tall tales and superstitions, then as mass hysteria. And 2 weeks ago, 3 children disappeared. 2 11-year-old boys and a 9-year-old girl. They went to the forest for mushrooms and never returned. Ghosts kidnapping children? Igor frowned. Is that possible? In our line of work, anything is possible, Vera shrugged. But most often there's someone living behind the actions of ghosts. Or almost living. She handed him a photograph. It showed an elderly man with a long gray beard, wearing an old quilted jacket and a Ushanka hat. Fyodor Mikhailovich Belov, 87 years old, local old-timer, claims his father was among those executed in 1919. He was the first to start talking about the ghosts. You think he's involved? I don't know. Possibly. His behavior changed around the same time these phenomena began. Before, he was just a grumpy old man, but now, according to neighbors, he mutters to himself all day and draws strange symbols on his barn doors. Streltsov carefully studied the photograph. Nothing special, a typical village grandfather like millions across the Union. But years of work in the KGB had taught him not to trust first impressions. And the children? Anything special about them? Ordinary village kids. Vera handed him several more photographs. Misha and Petya Kuznetsov, twin brothers, and Anya Lebedeva, daughter of the local collective farm chairman. What does the militia say? They're searching, combed the forest, brought in service dogs, no traces whatsoever. The wild animal theory was immediately ruled out. No blood, no signs of struggle, as if the children simply disappeared. Igor thoughtfully rubbed the scar on his temple, a reminder of that shootout in the mountains where he had met Dershavin. Will we receive support? Minimal, Vera grimaced. Officially, we're Special Department employees investigating a possible act of sabotage. The local police officer should provide assistance, but not interfere with the details. And in reality? In reality, we're on our own. Dershavin said he would assign an operational group only if high-level supernatural activity is confirmed. For now, we must manage with our own resources. Streltsov nodded. He was beginning to understand the rules of the game in Department 13. Minimum official support, maximum independence and responsibility. What do we do upon arrival? We check into the local hotel, meet with the police officer, interview the parents of the missing children and local residents. Standard procedure. Vera gathered the photographs back into the folder. And at night, we'll visit the execution site. If ghosts really appear there, we need to see them with our own eyes. How do we protect ourselves from ghosts if they show up? Silver bullets probably won't help. I have something. Vera patted the small bag sitting next to her. Special equipment from the technical department, and of course, our otherworldly friends. Mrak and Zarya can interact with ghosts directly. Seems like the KGB Academy didn't teach us everything, Igor smirked. Trust me, even in Department 13, you learn something new every day. Vera leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. I suggest you sleep. Who knows when the next opportunity will come? Streltsov nodded, but sleep wouldn't come. He looked out the window again. Snow-covered fir trees rushed by. Occasionally lone village houses flashed past. His hand instinctively reached for the medallion. The metal was cold, but Igor could feel that Mrak was awake inside. Eager to come out again, aren't you? He asked quietly. Your soul is tasty, master, responded the voice in his head. I want more. Not this time. Streltsov whispered. You'll call me anyway. You always do. With these words, Mrak's presence weakened, as if he had retreated deeper into the medallion. Igor sighed. His partner was right. Sooner or later he would have to summon Mrak again, and with that would come a new payment. He leaned back in his seat and tried to sleep, but the images from Limbo stood before his eyes. The distorted church, children frozen in trance, the fiery vortex under the demon priest's hood, and somewhere at the edge of consciousness, the blurred silhouette of the woman who had once been his mother. Arkhangelsk greeted them with a raw wind from the white sea and a gray, low sky. A hunched, middle-aged man in a militia captain's uniform was waiting for them on the platform. Captain Sokolova, Lieutenant Streltsov. He extended his hand in greeting. Captain Smirnov, head of the district militia department. The car is waiting. I'll take you to Kolmogorye. On the way, Smirnov told them about the investigation, but they didn't learn anything new. The militia had gone through all the standard theories for the children's disappearance, and was now simply maintaining search operations to reassure the local residents. Honestly, I don't understand why the KGB is involved, Smirnov said at one point, casting a quick glance at his passengers through the rearview mirror. 3 missing children is a tragedy, but not a matter of state security. We have reason to believe this is not just a disappearance, Vera replied with a rehearsed phrase. There may be an anti-Soviet group involved. In Kolmogorye, Smirnov made no attempt to hide his skepticism. Half the residents there are over 60. Who would want to kidnap children in a god-forsaken village? That's exactly what we need to find out, Captain, Vera said coldly, making it clear the dialogue was over. They spent the rest of the journey in silence. Streltsov looked out the window at the endless snow-covered fields and scattered villages. Northern backwoods. The perfect place for something supernatural. Kolmogorye turned out to be a rather large village with several hundred houses, a school, a hospital, a community center, and a hotel, a 2-story wooden building on the main street. That's where they were accommodated, in 2 adjacent rooms on the 2nd floor. Make yourselves comfortable, said Smirnov. I'll return in an hour and take you to the parents of the missing children. And also, he hesitated, the collective farm chairman, Lebedev, is a very influential man in the region, and he's furious about his daughter's disappearance. He demands results, calls the regional committee every day, so be prepared for a difficult conversation. When the door closed behind the captain, Vera turned to Igor. Dress warmly. After visiting the parents, we'll go straight to the execution site. It's already getting dark, and ghosts are more active at night. How will we explain our presence there to Smirnov? We won't. He'll take us to Lebedev's, and then he'll leave, and we... Vera took out a map of the area from her bag. Look, from the chairman's house to the execution site is about 3 kilometers. We'll get there ourselves. She opened her bag and began taking out equipment. 2 flashlights, walkie-talkies, strange devices with antennas and round dials resembling Geiger counters, and small metal balls the size of walnuts. What are these? Streltsov pointed at the balls. Spirit traps. Vera handed him several. If activated near a ghost, they can temporarily bind it. They'll last about 5 minutes, no more. But that's enough time to ask questions. And how do you activate them? Just squeeze it in your hand and aim at the target. They react to an impulse from the medallion. She put the equipment back in the bag. And don't forget to take your weapon. Pistols may not work against ghosts, but they're quite effective against living people if it turns out the kidnapping is the work of humans. Streltsov checked his PM pistol and added a spare magazine. He was beginning to understand that in Department 13, one always needed to be prepared for anything, from an ordinary criminal to a supernatural being. An hour later, they were sitting in the living room of Collective Farm Chairman Lebedev's house, a sturdy man in his 50s with a stern face and graying temples. Next to him on the sofa sat his wife, a thin woman with lifeless eyes and fingers nervously intertwined. "A week has passed," Lebedev said dully. "A week, and you've only just arrived. My daughter is somewhere out there." He waved his hand toward the window, beyond which dusk was already gathering. "We'll do everything possible to find Anya and the boys," Vera said confidently. "Tell us more about the day they disappeared. Did the children go to the forest alone?" "Yes," Lebedev's wife answered in a quiet voice. "Anya often went with the Kuznetsovs, their friends, neighbors, to the forest for mushrooms, to the river in summer. Normal things." "Did they say exactly where they were going?" "They said they were going to Black Hollow, where porcini mushrooms often grow," answered Lebedev. "It's about 1 kilometer from the village, not far from the old cemetery. But," he faltered, "they could have gone further, to the ravine, although we always forbade the children from going there." "Why?" Streltsov leaned forward. "It's a bad place," Lebedev frowned. "The old folks say that's where they executed our people during the Civil War." "Were they interested in this history?" asked Vera. "Anya definitely wasn't," answered her mother. "She was afraid of all these scary stories. But the boys, they might have been, especially if old Belov put them up to it." "Fyodor Mikhailovich?" Igor remembered the photograph from the dossier. "Did he interact with the children?" "That old oddball talks to the whole village," Lebedev snorted. "Goes around telling tales about ghosts, about how the souls of the executed are seeking justice. Children love listening to him. It's scary, interesting." "Could he harm them?" Streltsov asked cautiously. "Belov." Lebedev shook his head. "No, he's harmless. With quirks, of course, but not dangerous. Besides, he's nearly 90. How could he drag 3 children somewhere?" "Were there any other adults the children knew who might have?" Vera began, but Lebedev interrupted her. "Listen, comrades from the KGB." He stood up, towering over them. "We've already been through all these questions with the militia. We've turned the entire village upside down. No one saw them after they went into the forest. No one knows anything. And now you arrive and ask the same questions again." "We're just trying to gather all the facts," Vera replied calmly. "Any detail could be important." "Want a detail?" Lebedev went to the sideboard and took out a framed photograph. "Here's Anya, 9 years old, dreamed of becoming a doctor, loved to sing, and now she's gone. There's your detail." He sharply placed the photograph on the table. It showed a little girl with pigtails and a bright pioneer scarf. She was smiling, squinting in the sun. "Forgive my husband," Lebedev's wife said quietly. "The last week has been difficult." We understand, Vera nodded, and we'll do everything to find your daughter. Lebedev silently turned to the window. His shoulders were trembling slightly. Could we speak with Fyodor Mikhailovich? Asked Streltsov. Where can we find him? The last house before the forest, the woman answered. An old hut with blue shutters, but he might not open the door. Lately he's become quite reclusive. They asked a few more questions, but learned nothing substantial. After saying goodbye to the Lebedevs, they went outside. Smirnov was waiting for them in the car. To the hotel? He asked. No. Vera shook her head. Take us to Belov's. We need to talk to him. At this hour, it's already getting dark. The old man might not be in the mood for visitors. We'll risk it, she said firmly. Time is precious. On the way to Belov's house, Streltsov noticed that the village seemed deserted. No children playing in the street, no old women on benches, no men returning from work. Only the smoke from chimneys reminded him that there were people in the houses. Everyone's afraid, Smirnov remarked, catching his glance. After the children disappeared, it's as if a curse fell on the village, especially when these oddities began. Ghosts? Vera clarified. I don't believe in that nonsense, the captain said curtly. But people are scared. They say they see figures in Budnovka hats at night, hear shots and screams. Someone even claims to have seen a red banner over the ravine. Mass hysteria, nothing else. Perhaps, Vera nodded, but Igor noticed how she tensed. Have you yourself seen anything strange? Smirnov was silent for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tighter. 3 days ago I was on duty, he finally said, driving past the ravine at night, and I thought I heard sounds of gunfire. But when I got out of the car, silence, complete silence. I couldn't even hear birds or insects. And that's all? Asked Streltsov. There was also a smell, Smirnov spoke reluctantly, as if he didn't believe himself. Gunpowder smoke. I know it well, served in the army. But where would gunpowder smoke come from in the forest? I decided I must have imagined it. He stopped the car in front of a tilting hut with faded blue shutters. We're here. Belov's house. Will you wait for us? Asked Vera. Sorry, but I'm on duty. Smirnov shook his head. I can come back for you in an hour. Take you to the hotel. Don't bother. We'll manage ourselves. Vera opened the door. Thank you for your help, Captain. When the militia UAZ disappeared around the corner, Streltsov turned to Vera. You deliberately got rid of him. Of course, she nodded. After talking with Belov, we'll go straight to the ravine. It's almost dark, the perfect time for ghosts. They approached the house and knocked. No one answered. Vera knocked harder, but it remained quiet inside, though the lights were on. Maybe he's asleep, Igor suggested. At 7 in the evening? I doubt it. She walked around the house and peered through a window. No one visible, strange. Streltsov tried the door. It turned out to be unlocked and opened with a creak. Fyodor Mikhailovich, he called, entering the dim corridor. KGB, we need to talk. There was no response. Vera entered behind him, her hand on the pistol holster. Inside the hut, it was warm. Wood crackled in the stove. On the table stood a bowl with half-eaten porridge and a glass of tea. Everything indicated that the owner had just been here. Check the backyard, Vera whispered. I'll search the house. Streltsov nodded and headed for the back door. Stepping into the yard, he saw a barn with a slightly open door. A weak light came from inside, probably from a kerosene lamp. Cautiously approaching, Igor peered inside. What he saw made him freeze in place. The entire barn was hung with photographs and newspaper clippings, with strands of red wool stretched between them, creating an intricate web. In the center, on the floor, was drawn a large circle with strange symbols, similar to those Streltsov had seen in Limbo. Inside the circle sat Belov, a hunched old man with a gray beard reaching to his waist. He was rocking back and forth, muttering something under his breath, and beside him on the ground lay 3 children's hats. Vera, Streltsov called, not taking his eyes off the old man. Come here. A few seconds later, Sokolova appeared in the yard. Seeing what was happening in the barn, she instantly drew her pistol. "KGB, don't move," she shouted, entering. The old man slowly raised his head. His eyes were cloudy as if covered with a film. He didn't look frightened or surprised, rather absent, as if his consciousness were somewhere far away. "Too late," he whispered in a hoarse voice. "They took everything. Everything. Where are the children?" Streltsov stepped closer, pointing at the hats. "These items belong to them, right?" Belov slowly nodded. "Yes, this is all that's left, all they allowed me to keep." "Who are they?" Vera approached from the other side, not lowering her pistol. "The dead." The old man pronounced the word so casually, as if talking about neighbors. "Red Army soldiers. They've come back for their own." Igor exchanged glances with Vera. An ordinary madman, or a person who had truly encountered the supernatural. "Tell us more." Streltsov crouched next to the circle, careful not to cross its boundaries. "What happened to the children?" Belov raised his eyes to him, and Igor suddenly felt a chill. The old man's gaze had changed, becoming sharp, penetrating. "You're from the special department. This wasn't a question, but a statement. I knew they would send you, sooner or later." "How did you—" "I see your medallions." Belov pointed with a trembling hand at Streltsov's chest. "And what's contained in them? Darkness and light, just like I once had." Vera slowly lowered her pistol. "You were one of us?" she asked with disbelief. "Long ago, very long ago." The old man smiled bitterly. "Before the war even. Then it became too expensive to pay." He ran his hand over his face. "And they let me go, wrote me off, took the medallion, but something remained, the ability to see what others can't." He suddenly leaned forward and grabbed Igor by the hand. His grip was surprisingly strong for such an elderly person. "Guard your soul, Lieutenant. When the last part is gone, you'll become an empty shell, like me." Streltsov carefully freed his hand. "Fyodor Mikhailovich, finding the children is most important now. Can you help?" Belov leaned back and began rocking again. "They're in the ravine, but not where you think. They're in the ravine as it was 50 years ago, in the past." "What do you mean in the past?" Vera asked. "The ghosts have created a rift." The old man pointed to the strange symbols in the circle. "A temporal pocket. It's 1919 there now. February. A detachment of whites is carrying out the execution of Red Army prisoners and sympathizers. The children got there by accident, or not by accident." He fell silent, staring into space. "How do we get them back?" Streltsov was beginning to lose patience. "You can't." Belov shook his head. Unless you go in there yourselves, like I tried to. But they wouldn't let me in. Said there's no place for someone like me there. You need someone with a soul, with a whole soul." He fixed his gaze on Streltsov again. "You still have a large part. Maybe they'll let you through." "You tried to open a portal?" Vera pointed at the circle. "This is your work?" "Yes," the old man nodded. "I remember the rituals, but I lack the strength. And you? You have helpers." He nodded again at their medallions. "They can break through." Streltsov straightened up and moved over to Vera. "Do you believe him?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," she frowned. "He's clearly not himself. But if he really is a former employee, he might know what he's talking about." "And what should we do?" "Check his words. Let's go to the ravine. If there really is a rift there, our instruments should detect it." She turned to Belov. "We'll check the ravine, and you stay here. And don't try to perform any more rituals. It's dangerous for you and those around you." The old man didn't react, continuing to rock back and forth and muttering something under his breath. He seemed to have retreated into himself again. They left the barn and closed the door. Night had fully established its dominion, and the village was plunged into darkness, broken only by rare lights in windows. "What do you think?" asked Streltsov as they headed toward the forest. "I think the old man isn't lying." Vera took out a flashlight. "At least he himself believes what he's saying. Whether it's true or not, we'll find out on sight. And if it is true, if the children really did end up in the past, How will we get them out? There are protocols for such cases. She adjusted the bag on her shoulder. Temporal anomalies are rare but not unique. Derzhavin mentioned that in '78 in the Kursk region there was a similar situation, a breakthrough to 1943 during the Battle of Kursk. And how did it end? Vera was silent for a moment, then quietly replied, "It ended badly, but we have a chance to do better." They walked in silence, illuminating the path with flashlights. The forest was quiet, no bird songs, no rustling of small animals, only the crunch of snow under their feet and their own breathing, turning to vapor in the frosty air. After half an hour they reached the edge of the ravine, a deep cleft descending several dozen meters. At the bottom, the outline of a frozen stream was dimly visible. "Here," Vera stopped and took one of the strange devices from her bag. "Let's check." She switched on the device, and it immediately responded with a soft beep. The needle on the dial jerked and crept to the right. "There's a signal," she muttered. "Strong. Belov was right. There's an anomaly here." "And now what?" Streltsov stared tensely into the darkness of the ravine. "Do we call for backup?" "No time," Vera shook her head. "If the children ended up in the past during the execution, every minute counts." She took a second device from her bag, even stranger, a metal box with protruding wires and a small screen flashing green light. "What's that?" "A temporal analyzer," she explained. "It will show exactly where the rift leads." She pressed several buttons and the screen flashed faster. Then numbers appeared. 17.2-1919. February 17, 1919, Vera read. Matches the execution date. Suddenly from below, from the ravine, came a strange sound, like a distant shot. "Did you hear that?" Streltsov tensed. "Yes." Vera put the device back in her bag. "It's beginning. The rift is active." And then they saw it. Below in the ravine, a faint glow appeared. At first dim, blurred, like a distant bonfire, but with each second it grew brighter. From the fog, vague figures began to take shape. People in greatcoats and Budanovka hats, kneeling before a pit, and behind them, other silhouettes with rifles in their hands. "The beginning of the execution," Vera whispered. "We're seeing an echo of the past." "But where are the children?" Streltsov peered at the blurred silhouettes. "I don't see them." "They must be somewhere there." She suddenly froze. "Wait! Over there, on the right!" Igor looked in the indicated direction and saw 3 small figures hiding behind trees not far from the execution site. Even through the fog of time it was clear these were children. "We have to get them out." Streltsov decisively stepped toward the descent into the ravine. "Wait." Vera grabbed his arm. "We can't just enter like that. We need to create an anchor to return later. Otherwise we'll get stuck there like them." She took 2 small metal discs from her bag. "These are temporal anchors. Wear it around your neck, next to the medallion. This is our insurance." Streltsov took one of the discs and hung it around his neck. The metal was cold and seemed to vibrate in rhythm with his pulse. "And how do we enter?" "Through Mrak and Zarya." Vera removed her medallion. "They can overcome such barriers, but it will require payment." Streltsov nodded and removed his medallion. "Mrak," he called, "I need your help." The medallion trembled, and the familiar black substance flowed out, forming into a tall figure with amber eyes. "You call again, master. Again you need my help." Mrak's voice sounded in Igor's head. "And again there will be payment, a large payment." "Name your price," Streltsov said firmly. "Your memories of your first love and of your first kill, the beginning and the end." Igor clenched his fists. The memories of his first love were bright, warm, among the few truly happy moments of his life. And the first kill, it haunted him in nightmares, but was part of him as a soldier, as an officer. "I agree," he said after a pause. Nearby, Vera was having her own conversation with Zarya. Streltsov couldn't hear what the glowing entity was asking of her, but from the captain's face, he understood the price was high as well. "I'm ready," she said, turning to Igor. "Let's go." They began descending into the ravine. With each step, the glow became brighter and the sounds clearer. Now they could hear voices, officers' commands, the weeping and prayers of the condemned. Mrak and Zarya moved beside them, like shields on both sides. When they reached the bottom of the ravine, a semi-transparent, shimmering wall appeared before them, resembling fog twisting into bizarre patterns. The rift boundary, Vera explained. Beyond begins 1919. Mrak and Zarya approached the misty wall and simultaneously touched it. The fog wavered, then an opening appeared in it, like a portal to another time. Quickly, Vera stepped forward. It won't hold for long. Streltsov followed her. As he crossed the boundary, his body felt as if pierced by 1,000 needles. For a moment, everything went dark before his eyes, and his ears rang. And then, they found themselves in the same ravine, but everything looked different. There was no snow. The ground was wet, covered with last year's leaves. The air smelled of smoke and gunpowder. And ahead, about 100 meters from them, a terrible scene was unfolding, the execution of Red Army prisoners. About 20 men in tattered greatcoats were kneeling at the edge of a freshly dug pit. Behind them, officers and soldiers in white uniforms with rifles at the ready. "Where are the children?" Streltsov frantically looked around. "There," Vera pointed to the thickets on the right. "I see movement." They rushed in the indicated direction, trying to remain unnoticed. But it was difficult. There was little cover between them and the execution site. "Hey, who's there?" Suddenly came a shout. One of the white guard officers had noticed them and was pointing a revolver in their direction. "Keep going," shouted Streltsov to Vera. "Find the children. I'll hold them off." She nodded and disappeared into the bushes, while Igor drew his pistol and took cover behind a tree. A shot rang out. A bullet hit the trunk next to his head. "Mak!" he called. "Help!" The dark figure materialized beside him, and Igor felt as if part of his consciousness was tearing away. Memories of his first love, of Masha from the neighboring courtyard, of awkward kisses in the entrance hall, of notes passed during lessons. All this was disappearing, replaced by emptiness. Mrak rushed forward toward the white guards, and Streltsov followed, shooting on the move. The PM pistol was much more modern than the weapons of 1919, and its shots sounded different, louder, sharper. This caused confusion in the ranks of the whites. "Reds! Reinforcements!" someone shouted. A firefight broke out. Streltsov took cover behind trees, firing precise bursts. Mrak moved between enemies, sowing panic. To them, he appeared as a black fog, hindering visibility. Taking advantage of the confusion, the captive Red Army soldiers scattered, some trying to seize weapons from the nearest white guards. In the midst of the battle, Igor saw Vera running out of the thickets, leading 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. They were frightened but unharmed. "Fall back!" he shouted, firing a few more cover shots. They ran back to the place where they had entered the rift, but the misty wall was no longer there. "Where's the portal?" Streltsov asked in panic. "Calm down." Vera took out the temporal anchor hanging around her neck. "Now." She pressed the center of the disc and it glowed with blue light. A faint shimmer appeared in the air before them. "Zarya!" she called. The glowing figure stretched its hands toward the shimmer, and it began to expand, turning into a passage. "Quickly, children, jump in there!" Vera pushed the 3 frightened youngsters toward the portal. "But what about the Red Army soldiers?" asked Streltsov, looking back at the continuing firefight. "We can save them." "No," Vera answered sharply. "We can't change history. That's the primary rule during temporal shifts." The children had already passed through the portal. Vera stepped in after them, looking back at Igor. "Come on, the portal is closing." Streltsov fired one more shot and ran to the portal. In the last moment before jumping, he looked back and saw one of the Red Army soldiers looking directly at him. Their gazes met, and Igor suddenly realized with horror that this face was familiar to him. Very familiar. It was his grandfather. He froze for a moment, but Marak pushed him in the back, and Streltsov tumbled out of the portal back into the snowy ravine of 1984. At that same instant, the passage closed, and with it, Marak and Zarya disappeared, returning to the medallions. "Are you all right?" Vera helped him to his feet. "Yes," he exhaled, feeling his head spinning. "The children?" "Safe, but frightened." She pointed to the 3 kids sitting on the snow in a daze. "We need to get them to the village." "Vera," Streltsov grabbed her arm, "I saw my grandfather there. He was among the Red Army soldiers." Sokolova frowned. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I have his photograph from that period. It was definitely him." "But," she faltered, "if he was there and they executed him, how are you here?" "I don't know." Igor shook his head. "Maybe he survived. Or we changed history," Vera quietly finished. "God, Derzhavin will kill us." They helped the children get up and began ascending from the ravine. The children were too shocked to speak. Only the girl was quietly sobbing. "It's all right, Anya," Streltsov said gently, taking her hand. "You're home. It's over." He felt a strange emptiness inside, where memories of his first love had been before, and of his first kill in Afghanistan. The beginning and the end, just as Marak had requested. When they reached the village, people were already waiting for them. Someone had spotted flashlight beams in the forest and raised the alarm. Almost all the villagers had gathered at the outskirts, led by Chairman Lebedev and Captain Smirnov. Seeing his daughter, Lebedev rushed to her, scooped her up in his arms, and held her tightly. His wife, sobbing, stroked the girl's head. The boys' parents also rushed to their children, surrounding them with care. "Where did you find them?" asked Smirnov, approaching Streltsov and Vera. "In the forest," Sokolova answered briefly. "They got lost and spent several days in a hunter's cabin. It's a miracle they survived in such cold." The story had been prepared in advance, standard cover for unexplainable events. "Strange," the captain frowned. "We combed the entire forest, all cabins and dugouts. How could we have missed them?" "Apparently not all," Igor shrugged. "The main thing is that the children are alive and well." Smirnov looked at them suspiciously for a while longer, but then nodded and went to receive thanks from the happy parents. "We need to talk to Belov," Vera said quietly when they were alone. "He must know more than he told us." "Tomorrow," Streltsov felt profound fatigue. "Right now we can barely stand." They returned to the hotel around midnight. Igor immediately went to his room, but sleep wouldn't come. He replayed the evening's events over and over in his mind, especially the moment when he saw his grandfather among those condemned to execution. Vasily Petrovich Streltsov. According to family legend, he had fought for the Reds during the Civil War, then lived in Leningrad, worked in a factory, and died during the blockade. But if he was executed in 1919 in the Arkhangelsk region, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said, propping himself up on the bed. Vera entered the room. She had already changed into civilian clothes, jeans and a sweater, her hair loose. Without her uniform, she looked younger and strangely more vulnerable. "Can't sleep?" she asked, sitting down in the chair by the window. "I can't fall asleep," Igor admitted. "Too much happening." "I understand." She took a flask from her pocket and offered it to him. "Here, it will help you sleep." Streltsov took a sip. Inside was not alcohol, as he had expected, but something more astringent, with an herbal flavor. "What is this?" "A special infusion from our medical department," she smiled weakly. "It helps after losing soul fragments, relieves the emptiness." He took another sip and indeed felt the heaviness recede a little. "What did you give to Zarya?" he asked, returning the flask. Vera was silent, looking out the window at the dark street. "Memories of my younger brother," she finally answered, "of how we grew up together, played, quarreled, my entire childhood, essentially." "I'm sorry." Igor didn't know what else to say. "It's nothing," she shrugged. "Zarya always takes things related to family. Apparently she likes the taste of such memories. After the first mission, she took the memory of my first love, then of my parents, now of my brother. Soon I'll completely forget that I ever had a family. She took a sip from the flask. And what about your grandfather? Why are you sure it was him? I have his photograph from 1920 when he served in the Red Army. I know that face well. It was definitely him. But if he was executed, exactly, somehow he must have survived. Otherwise, I simply wouldn't exist. Vera thoughtfully rubbed the medallion on her neck. There are two possibilities. First, he actually survived the execution. Such things happened. A bullet grazed him, or he pretended to be dead. Second, she fell silent, as if not daring to say it aloud. Second, Streltsov prompted her. Perhaps we really did change the course of history. She averted her gaze. Our intervention, the shootout, it could have saved him. In the original timeline, he might have died, but we created a new branch of reality. Is that possible? Theoretically, yes. Practically, it's a serious protocol violation. For something like that, you could not only be expelled from the department, but also court-martialed. Igor leaned back on his pillow. So what now? Tomorrow we'll talk to Belov. He clearly knows more than he said. Then we'll send a report to Derzhavin, but without mentioning your grandfather. Until we figure out what happened, it's better to keep this between us. She stood, heading for the door. Sleep, Streltsov. Tomorrow will be a tough day. When the door closed behind her, Igor took a small, worn photograph from the inner pocket of his jacket hanging on the chair. It showed a young man in a budinovka and greatcoat with a stern gaze and firmly pressed lips. Vasily Petrovich Streltsov, his grandfather, the man he had just seen in the past among those sentenced to execution. How did you survive? Igor whispered, studying the familiar features. Or, did we save you? The medallion on his chest vibrated slightly, as if Marak had responded to his words, but his voice in Streltsov's head remained silent. Instead of answers, there were only new questions. Morning began with a phone call. Streltsov, having slept only a couple of hours, struggled to open his eyes and reached for the receiver. Lieutenant? Smirnov's voice sounded tense. Come quickly. Belov's house. He's dead. What? Igor instantly awoke. How did it happen? Looks like suicide. Hanged himself in the barn. But there are peculiarities. Better come and see for yourself. 15 minutes later, he and Vera were at Belov's house. In the barn, where yesterday they had found the old man with the children's hats, a militia operational group was now working. The body had already been taken down and placed on makeshift stretchers, covered with a sheet. A neighbor found him around 7 in the morning, Smirnov explained. Came to borrow some salt, saw the front door wide open and the house empty. Looked in the barn and discovered this. He pulled back the sheet, showing the dead man's face. Belov's skin had taken on a bluish tint. His tongue protruded from his mouth. His eyes were open and seemed to stare right at them. But that wasn't what caught Streltsov's attention. What's that on his forehead? He asked, leaning closer. A strange symbol was burned into Belov's skin, a circle with a cross inscribed in it and 4 dots between the rays. I don't know, Smirnov shook his head. A burn, but a strange one, like a brand. And judging by all indications, it was inflicted after death. There's no inflammatory reaction. Vera and Igor exchanged glances. They both knew what this meant. Posthumous interference by supernatural forces. Where did he hang himself? Sokolova asked. Smirnov pointed to a beam in the barn's ceiling. There. Used an ordinary rope. Stood on a chair himself. Put the noose on. Pushed off. Typical suicide. Typical, Vera echoed, but doubt pervaded her tone. And what about the hands? What about them? Were they bound? Any rope marks? Smirnov raised his eyebrows in surprise. No, no marks. Should there be? Not necessarily. She waved it off. Just checking. When the militiamen carried out the body, Streltsov and Vera remained alone in the barn. This isn't suicide, Igor said quietly. Of course not, she agreed. He was killed. Or more precisely, his soul was taken. Did you see that symbol? Yes. What does it mean? The mark of transition. A sign that the soul was forcibly extracted from the body for travel between worlds. A very ancient ritual, forbidden even for supernatural beings. Streltsov looked around. The barn's interior had changed. The photographs and newspaper clippings had disappeared from the walls, and the circle with symbols on the floor was gone. Someone removed all the evidence, he noted. Not someone. Vera approached the wall and ran her hand over the boards. Look. At first glance, the wall appeared normal, but upon closer inspection, Igor noticed that the wood was strangely distorted, as if melted from within. What is this? Traces of supernatural presence, of the highest order. Someone very powerful was here, Vera frowned. Possibly a demon. Like Ignatius and Vilnius? Stronger, much stronger. Streltsov clutched the medallion hanging on his neck. Inside, Murak was restless. Igor could feel his agitation, almost fear. Murak knows something, he said. He's frightened. Zarya too, Vera nodded. They sense danger. We need to return to Moscow, urgently. And the investigation? We haven't figured out what happened. I'm afraid we've learned enough, she lowered her voice. The temporal rift, Civil War ghosts, now Belov's murder, everything indicates that something bigger has begun than just local interference. And that's beyond our level. They left the barn and headed toward Belov's house. Inside, militiamen were also working, examining the old man's meager possessions. Found anything interesting? Streltsov asked Smirnov. Nothing special. Clothes, dishes, some food. No suicide note, no documents explaining his action. Except, he hesitated. What? We found ash in the stove. Looks like he burned some papers before his death. And quite a lot. There was a whole stack. May I take a look? Smirnov pointed to a tin bucket standing by the stove. Inside were several blackened, incompletely burned scraps of paper. Vera carefully took one out. Looks like a fragment of a letter, she said, examining the charred piece. I see a date. 1942. Did he serve during the war? Igor asked. No, Smirnov shook his head. According to documents, Belov was discharged for health reasons before the war. He worked in the rear, in logging. Vera continued to sift through the ashes. There's something else here. She carefully extracted a small metal object blackened by fire. This is... She broke off, and Streltsov saw her pupils dilate. In her hand, Vera held a burned but still recognizable medallion, exactly like their own. They didn't take it, she whispered. When Belov was dismissed from the department, they left him the medallion. What have you got there? Smirnov stepped closer, but Vera had already hidden the find in her pocket. Nothing special, she said. Just an old medal, perhaps a family heirloom. The captain looked at her skeptically, but didn't press the issue. When can you take the body? Asked Streltsov, changing the subject. Today we'll take it to the district morgue for autopsy. But I think the conclusion will be standard, mechanical asphyxiation resulting from hanging. Undoubtedly, Vera nodded. Captain, we'll probably return to Moscow. Our mission here is complete. The children have been found. No threats to state security have been identified. So quickly? Smirnov was surprised. What about investigating Belov's death? That, with your permission, we'll leave to local authorities, she smiled. By all indications, it really is suicide, possibly due to guilt. Guilt? For what? Who knows? Maybe he really was involved in the children's disappearance, and when they were found, he decided to end his life. In any case, it's no longer our jurisdiction. Smirnov was clearly unconvinced, but didn't argue with the KGB officers. An hour later, they were at Arkhangelsk Airport, waiting for a flight to Moscow. The departure was delayed due to bad weather, giving them time to talk. What are you going to tell Derzhavin? Asked Streltsov, looking out the window at the snow-covered runway. The truth, almost all of it. Vera twirled Belov's burned medallion in her hand. About the temporal rift, about saving the children, about the old man's murder, but about your grandfather, it's better to remain silent, at least for now. Why? Because altering history is too serious. If Derzhavin decides we created a temporal paradox, the consequences could be unpleasant for both of us. Streltsov nodded. He understood what she was talking about. Changing the past was one of the main prohibitions in working with the supernatural. What about Belov's medallion? He asked. Can you determine who was his companion? Vera carefully examined the burned metal. Judging by the symbols, it was a water spirit, something ancient, connected to rivers and lakes. They're usually calm, non-aggressive, an odd choice for an operative. Maybe that's why he was removed? Possibly. Or, she faltered, or his entity betrayed him. That happens too. They switch to the enemy's side if offered a better price. And what happens to the person then? Usually they're killed. Vera said this in a matter-of-fact tone, as if talking about something completely ordinary. Or, if they're lucky, their memory of service is wiped and they're released. Like Belov. Yes, but something doesn't add up. If his memory was erased, how did he know about us, about the medallions? And why did he keep his? Their conversation was interrupted by a voice from the speakers announcing boarding for the flight to Moscow. They got up and headed toward the exit to the airfield. Belov said, "They took everything," Streltsov remembered as they climbed the stairs to the plane. Who did he mean? The ghosts? Or our department? I don't know, Vera shook her head. But I intend to find out. There should be records about him in the archives, about his service, about the reasons for his dismissal. If Derzhavin allows you to see them. If he doesn't, I'll find another way, determination sounded in her voice. Something's not right here, Streltsov. Something bigger than just Civil War ghosts. And I want to know what exactly. The plane took off, carrying them back to Moscow. Below stretched the endless forests of the Arkhangelsk region, hiding their secrets under a snowy cover. Somewhere down there in a snow-filled ravine, just a day ago, they had changed history. And now they had to learn what price they would have to pay for it. Colonel Derzhavin listened to their report attentively, without interrupting. Only when Vera finished her account did he rise from behind his desk and approach the large map of the USSR hanging on his office wall. Arkhangelsk region, he stuck a red pin into the map. The third case in the last 2 months in this region. Before that, there were Murmansk and Pechora. He pointed to other red dots. Notice the pattern? The north, Streltsov answered. All cases in the north of the country. Precisely, Derzhavin nodded, and all connected to the past, to wars, conflicts, mass deaths, as if something or someone is trying to use these traumas of history. For what? Asked Vera. For a breakthrough, the colonel returned to his desk. Weakening the boundary between worlds. It's not the first time we've encountered attempts at large-scale invasion, but usually they were chaotic, uncoordinated. And now, he drummed his fingers on the table. Now I see a system, a plan. Who do you suspect? Streltsov leaned forward. There are beings much more ancient and powerful than those you've dealt with. Derzhavin said this quietly, almost in a whisper. They were here long before humans. They're called primal demons, the elders, the ancients. They have many names. Once they ruled this world, but then they were banished to a place worse than limbo, to the abyss. And now they want to return? Vera frowned. They always want to return, Derzhavin smiled grimly. But now something has changed. They've become stronger, or the boundary has become weaker. In any case, it's extremely dangerous. He opened his desk drawer and took out 2 new folders. In light of this, you have a new assignment. Northern Karelia. In a restricted zone, on the territory of a military testing ground, anomalous activity has been recorded. The local air defense unit reports strange objects in the sky, not detected by radar, and inexplicable equipment malfunctions. And 2 weeks ago, an entire platoon disappeared. 23 people. They searched everywhere but found no trace. He handed the folders to Vera and Igor. You'll fly the day after tomorrow. Prepare thoroughly. It will be more difficult there than in Vilnius and Arkhangelsk. And, he looked directly at Streltsov, guard your soul, Lieutenant. Soon you might need all of it. What do you mean? Our analysts predict a critical event in the coming months. Something that will require all our resources, all our strength, and then every particle of soul will count. They left Derzhavin's office with new folders and a heavy sense of impending danger. What did he mean by critical event? Asked Streltsov as they walked down the corridor of the base. I don't know exactly, Vera looked concerned. But rumors say the analytical department has been working for several months on deciphering some ancient prophecy. Something to do with stars, portals, and the return of ancient beings. Sounds like a science fiction novel. Our entire work sounds like a science fiction novel, Streltsov, she smiled faintly. And yet it's real, as are the threats we face. They reached the elevator that would take them from the underground base to the surface, to the ordinary world. What will you do before the flight? Asked Igor, pressing the button. Visit the archives, Vera replied. I want to find Belov's file, find out what really happened to him. And what about the medallion? She patted her pocket where the burned artifact lay. I'll take it to the technical department, let them study it. Maybe we can understand what happened to its owner and his companion. The elevator doors opened and they stepped inside. And you? Asked Vera. What are your plans? Streltsov pondered. He wanted to learn more about his grandfather, about his fate after that execution. But how could he do this without attracting Derzhavin's attention? I'll visit Aunt Tamara, he decided. After my mother's death, she raised me. She might have photographs of my grandfather, documents, something that will help understand what happened after 1919. The elevator slowly ascended to the surface, to the ordinary world with its familiar problems and concerns, to a world where there were no demons, ghosts, and temporal rifts. At least that's what most people thought, and Streltsov suddenly felt the weight of responsibility for this world, for its preservation and safety. You know, he said, watching the numbers counting the floors, sometimes I regret accepting Derzhavin's offer. Me too, Vera unexpectedly admitted. Every time I give up a part of my soul, every time I feel myself becoming less human, but then I remember why we do this, and the regret disappears. The elevator stopped, the doors opened. They emerged into the spacious lobby of the building on Lubyanka, among ordinary KGB employees who had no idea about the existence of the 13th Department deep underground. See you the day after tomorrow, said Vera, heading toward the exit. Be careful, Streltsov, and prepare yourself for the fact that in Karelia we'll have to pay again, possibly more than ever before. She left, leaving Igor alone in the lobby. He stood there, feeling the medallion on his chest, cold, heavy, with mrak lurking inside. And he thought about what awaited him next, about how many more parts of his soul he would have to give up, and whether anything would remain in the end of the Igor Streltsov he once was.